Yes. Closure of Lanterman Developmental Center oversight issue.
Thanks. I'll be addressing the bullets on the Lanterman closure. If possible, I'd like to start with addressing all of the community state staff bullets at once, and I'll try and be as brief as possible, but if I miss anything, do let me know and I'll go back. I'd like to start really with contrasting between the Ag News closure and the Lanterman closure and why those were different. Really with the Ag News closure, I will say that we had a little more time to develop relationships as the Lanterman closure the Ag News closure occurred. And with Ag News, we really only had 3 main regional centers to deal with that were working on the transition. And so our relationships there were really more easy to develop as we worked out contracts and types of job settings that community state staff folks would work in. When we got to the Lanterman closure, we did have a shorter time frame, but we also had 8 main regional centers we were dealing with, 15 regional centers total with the Lanterman closure. So it really did make the communication and the imagination of what kinds of state staff work could be done different at the Lanterman closure. Additionally, there were really fewer state staff employment options in the Bay Area at the time of the Ag News closure. In the LA Basin, there are a number of state staff employment options. So some of our possibilities for state staff to continue working with the folks who were leaving Lanterman just didn't quite mesh up the same as it did for Ag News. With respect to the types of jobs that the staff do, the community state staff that were assigned to the Ag News closure continue to administer those contracts and work with the staff and do all of the personnel administration that goes with them. Those were the contracts that were negotiated as part of the closure process. The same thing with Lanterman. The Lanterman staff go with them and attend to the contracts that were developed as part of the Lanterman closure process. Those were separately negotiated specific to closure activities for Ag News and for Lanterman. And what happened last year is there was additional language that allowed us to have a statewide program that's not linked to a closure, so it allows for, in addition to the community state staff to work as part of transition activities or in community options, to also work for deflections and other types of employment through the community state staff program. So we did put together a presentation to the bargaining units in August saying how we thought it would work in new situations, and got questions back from them. We worked through a policy statement regarding the conditions issues. We probably overworked that a bit too much because, quite frankly, the circumstances with working with deflections and transitions will be a little bit different when there's not a specific closure process that it's tied to. But we did complete that and re-noticed the bargaining units in April that we were ready to move forward with the new community state staff program. The staff that worked on Lanterman would be assigned in the south, and the staff that worked on Ag News would be assigned in the north, and we'd run the southern contracts through them, the southern staff at Fairview, and the northern contracts through the north here at in Sacramento. To date, we've only had 2 bargaining units respond to their 30-day notice. I think today was our outside date for responses. I'm hoping to hear some last minutes back, but we have already started scheduling those meetings. They're set to occur in the next couple of weeks here in May. And that process will be coordinated by CalHR, and as agreements are needed, we're anticipating that those would be side letters to current bargaining unit contracts. We are looking at how we can improve participation in the state system. One of the things that we're doing in the Southern California area is that we're putting the community state staff in with the regional resource development project staff at Fairview so that they can be able to anticipate what's going on in the transition meetings as people transition out, plus that they can hear when we engage in the 4418, that assessment and deflection process, what some of the basic needs are in the community, and then they can be in a situation where they can better analyze what types of service gaps that we have that they may be able to fit in and offer up. And then we'll have those staff be able to meet more with stakeholders and regional centers to really work out what kind of service they could provide to them and really market the program quite a bit more is what we're hoping for. And that's really the short version of community state staff. I hope I didn't miss anything. I'll go back to the question now, if that's okay, on the options considered for the Lanterman land and how we've worked on that. Currently, we've been meeting with Cal State University Pomona every other week on the transition of the property of Lanterman to Cal State University Pomona. They have been great in working. I will say this is the fastest transfer of jurisdiction of property we have done for any of the closures, 6 months. So they have been very good in working that out with us. We are talking to them about how we can make an agreement to have options regarding future development at Lanterman. We're also discussing how this process could be done via their master planning use of the property. And so we're still in early discussions there, but they are open to us being able to utilize that property.
And a part of those, and I'm asking, will or has been a part of those negotiations or discussions, housing options on that property for future use for people with developmental disabilities?
Yes, future housing and housing-related developments.
And so what will ultimately govern the decision? Their own university planning for the property, or how is that decision-making weighted, if you will?
They do have to, as we transition the land over, we go through a historic preservation process where we turn that over. They also have to develop a land use proposal, but part of that also includes a master planning process,
Okay.
and we would anticipate we'd be
So
part
it's
of
not
that.
kind of being dovetailed into the university's existing master planning process?
Right.
It will be now. Okay, thank you. That's an area of concern for the committee, so thank you very much.
And then I think the last question I needed to address here was the proposal related to the settlement of workers' comp claims and how that differs in the past. With the closures of previous developmental centers, especially prior to some reform in the early 2000s, some comp cases were carried for lengthy amounts of times. Those were generally moved to other developmental centers and carried as part of their administrative costs. We had a recent audit that really disallowed the administrative costs for closed facilities, even though they were being carried at the other developmental centers. So the administrative expenses that we were calculating in our Medi-Cal rates at the open facilities was disallowed. So we really only have 1 year after closure to claim matching federal funds for the Lanterman disability claims. So we are working with that. That number we've gotten now is the state compensation insurance fund's estimate of what it would take to settle all of those cases. And we're working now to really close out those cases, because again, the more cases we close out, it's really kind of twofold. The more cases we close out, we get matching federal funds so long as we do it this year. That $17 million is in this year's budget because we have no base after June for Lanterman. But also, it reduces the number of cases we have to carry forward because there would be continued costs associated with carrying cases that aren't closed. Okay. And that's pretty much it for Lanterman.
Thank you. Leo? Finance? Any questions from committee members? Senator Stone?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation again. The state budget notes a savings of $64 million from the closure of the Lanterman Developmental Center and the movement of persons from the DC to the community. Are we planning on taking that $64 million and reinvesting it back into developmental services, not sticking it back in the general fund, which has been a concern by many of us on the dais?
I really can't answer the question.
Senator, the way the process works now is that any savings that we have on either side of our budget would revert to the general fund. That's just typically how it works right now.
Well, I hope there's some way we can legislatively fix that, because obviously one of the goals is to save the taxpayers money, but I also don't want to take away from the growing need of taking care of developmentally disabled communities that we are trying to help out, especially when we see the cut in services that we've had, over $1 billion in the past 10 years. And then I also want to express my concern about the properties, this property in Pomona. I think that it should still in some way be utilized to help the developmental community. And I hope that, and I heard that you're negotiating with Cal Poly, and I'm hoping that as a part of that plan that there's going to be a strong emphasis on the developmental communities and further enhancements for them. I was also very pleased to hear, and I think if I heard you right, that there's going to be a first right of refusal for the employees that formerly worked at some of these developmental centers as we go out into the community, that they're going to be given ample opportunities to move their services and not stick them in the unemployment line, but to utilize these very dedicated employees to take care of some of the most severely disabled people in our state.
Right. The way that the contracting process works is we actually work to identify jobs that might be supplied by community state staff, and then contracts are developed, and then the staff are put into that contract. So we're essentially contracting with the private entities for state staff jobs.
Okay, I appreciate whatever we can do as we embark down these processes to do what we can to help those employees that have dedicated their lives to helping people with these disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. On this item, again, it is item
I'll move the
4.
recommendation.
Thank you very much, which is to approve $17.3 million, $9.1 million general fund to pursue settlement of open workers' compensation claims for Lanterman employees, and we'll hold the other items open pending May revise. And we'll just keep that roll open to allow Senator Monning to add on when he returns. We'll move on to issue 5, employee compensation and other baseline adjustments. Budget requests. We're on page 17 of the agenda.
Yeah, this is very straightforward. You already have the request there for the amount of money, $6.8 million in the current year and $6.8 in the budget year for retirement costs, and then $6.5 in the current year and $6.4 in the budget year for salary adjustments. These were already negotiated and agreed upon bargaining unit contract through the bargaining process. So this is the amount of money that's needed to meet those commitments.
LAO, Finance. Member, Senator Stone, any questions?
No, I think we're okay.
Okay. Are you okay with the recommendation to approve?
I'll move it, but I'm just going to express my concern that we have disparities in the state staff versus those that are working in the community, and that is a concern. But I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Concern will be duly noted. We'll move on to issue 6, staffing adjustments for acute crisis units. Budget request, page 18 of the agenda.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We're right now have both the Northern Crisis Center and the Southern Crisis Center open. Fairview in the south accepted their first admission on April 6th, and Sonoma accepted their first admission on April 28th. Sonoma has 1 additional consumer accepted, and we are waiting the court order for that admission. Fairview has 2 additional consumers accepted and approved for admission pending court orders for those individuals as well. We have all the staff assigned on board for all of the ancillary and professional staff. We have about half of the set-aside staff to have the centers on for level of care nursing, specifically the PTs and PTAs on. Right now, but we certainly have sufficient staff for the 1 person in each place to keep the units open. We're currently taking an approach like we do for what we call an acute unit, an acute hospital unit, where they aren't in use all the time, so your staff are deployed elsewhere, and then when you have someone in residence on that unit, you deploy to the unit. In this case, they're assigned to that unit and deployed off when there isn't an acute crisis center person there, but right now, of course, they're deployed on. We do have support staff set up in the programs that, the treatment programs that support this crisis center. All of the folks in those programs are specially trained as backup staff who can fill in as staffing needs change. So the staffing is pretty good right now. As far as the admission process for the units, for folks to come into the state crisis centers, they go through the standard admission process that we have that's described in the Welfare and Institutions Code 4418.7. That assessment process occurs. The regional center indicates that the person's at risk for admission to a developmental center, and the regional project goes out and assesses the individual. Once that assessment's done, the developmental center assures that the person meets the ICF, the intermediate care facility, because both of these centers are licensed for intermediate care. So they need to meet the qualifications for intermediate care and the statutory crisis requirement that's in the statute as well. And once they assure that they meet those two requirements, they're accepted for admission, where they submit to the department for acceptance or admission. Once that acceptance occurs, then they go to obtain the court order. And that's pretty much the quick admission. You want to, well, and we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between how that would compare to the community crisis home.
So I'm Nancy Bargeman. I'm going to address the difference between the acute crisis and at Sonoma and Fairview as compared to the community crisis homes. Just to remind you, we have the 4 that are going to be developed. A little bit in difference, although you may see some individuals who would be referred to both that may be appropriate for referrals for both. There are some differences. So with the community crisis homes, whereas the acute crisis at Sonoma and Fairview would need to meet the requirement for the ICF, the community crisis homes do not. Community crisis homes will have a level of assessment that will be required. However, it's not under the 4418.7 process, and so it's something that can be done relatively quickly. That would be a part of the service provider's service that they would be providing. There's also not a court order that would be required for accessing the services in the community. We do know that the urgency of being able to get services quickly is something that we want to have assurances that community crisis homes will be available to be responsive to. And so as we're moving forward with development, that's an area that we're going to make sure. We do anticipate that it's going to still take a good 18 to 24 months to be able to get the first home opened. So another difference between the two is that Sonoma and Fairview is currently available for services, whereas right now the community crisis homes are in the process of development.
Okay, and then with respect to the certification and federal funding at Sonoma, we are seeking reimbursement of federal funds for services provided at the Sonoma Crisis Center now. And were we to be unsuccessful in recertifying the ICF units at Sonoma, then we would no longer be able to apply for federal reimbursement.
So let me get clarification. I toured the facility at Sonoma several months ago. So since we've had such a healthy conversation about the federal funding issue, let me make sure I've got this straight. So the unit is open in Sonoma now,
Yes.
pending federal approval, which will then lead to the federal funding to flow to pay for that unit?
Well, the way that we've only got the 4 specific units, we are the only units that we've withdrawn from federal funding participation.
Right.
And with the other residences, for instance, we've taken residences that had more individuals on them, that were larger, that we wanted to give people more space. We split them in half, split those out. Those second units that we've opened to do that, we also receive federal funding for those. We're billing federal funding for those. So the opening of the crisis unit is essentially the same as that. It's a licensed unit. We've gone to CDPH. Those beds were in suspense. They were certified beds in suspense. So we've removed them from suspense via CDPH. And so we would be seeking federal reimbursement through that process.
And so are there residents currently in the Sonoma unit?
One person.
Okay. I wanted to just back up and get clarification, because as I recall, while we were there, we asked the specific question if this unit would be open prior to the resolution of the other units that are currently in question at Sonoma. So it wasn't my expectation that it would open until this is resolved and the broader federal approval on the other beds that are still in question has not been resolved.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, your understanding is correct. At the time, we were still talking to CMS, and we have included the acute crisis unit in the agreement. We, as Mr. LaFont said, we are billing, and but you're right, this is a switch from what you were told at the time you visited.
And so you'll continue to bill until such time that the feds say it's okay or not?
Correct. Under the extensions we're receiving, we're going to continue billing until they tell us.
And just plain devil's advocate, let's say that it does not meet their approval, what then happens with the one resident who's there? Is that something we backfill again, or would that resident to be transferred elsewhere?
I think that what we would probably have to do is look for resources in the community, I would think.
To transfer?
Yes.
And so it's a lovely unit that underwent clearly quite a bit of renovation, just in terms of the build out. And so how was that paid for? Would that be covered under any federal funds, or?
We received an appropriation through the Budget Act to do that.
Got it. Okay.
So if it's okay with you, we're going to move on to issue 7.
Hang on one
Oh,
quick
sorry.
second. We're going to take, let me see if LAO or Finance have any comments. Nothing? Senator Stone? Okay, so we're going to hold this item 6 open, pending May revise. Moving on to issue 7, expansion of secure treatment program at Porterville Developmental Center, budget request.
So to address the first question, whether, besides having to appear in court to address this issue, has the court indicated whether it may take any other actions given the delays in placement? Since the fall of 2014, the Health and Human Services Agency, the Attorney General's Office, the Department of State Hospitals, and the Department of Developmental Services have been meeting with the LA County Superior Court. And the court, in the initial meeting that we had with them, we've had, I think, 4 meetings over that time period since fall of 2014. They've expressed their concern that individuals with developmental disabilities that are sitting in county jail are having their constitutional rights to due process violated. And we understand that, and we don't disagree. And we have been, obviously, as the governor's budget reflects, we've been working to find resolution to that problem. But the court also took an action recently. This was, again, LA County Superior Court. They did refer one individual to our facility at Canyon Springs. Canyon Springs is located in Cathedral City out in Palm Desert. It's the facility is run by the department. It's a community facility. But unfortunately, the staff are not trained to deal with forensic patients, nor do we provide restoration of competency training at the facility. So the court made the placement to Canyon Springs because the individual was being victimized in jail. So while we were able, fortunately what happened was we had an individual who was in the secure treatment program at Canyon Springs, who was ready to transition into the step-down facility the individuals in the secure treatment program at Porterville. He was ready to transition to the step-down facility at Canyon Springs. So what we were able to do was move the two individuals, but the individual that was at Canyon Springs did not receive competency training while they were there. So but that's another consequence of, again, I think sometimes it's just a misunderstanding on what type of facility Canyon Springs is and what type of services are offered there.
Okay, and regarding the activities we do to restore competency for individuals who come to the secure treatment program, individuals, it's really part of their daily activity program. They participate in daily training and classes specifically designed to assist in essentially it's a competency core curriculum that they work on. The curriculum is developed against the 14 sections of the competency assessment instrument that is used to assess competency, and each section is taught separately. The program has been used for a number of years, was designed originally at Atascadero State Hospital and ported to Camarillo State Hospital, used with the individuals there. When Camarillo closed and those individuals moved to Porterville, it continued on at Porterville. The Porterville staff has really maintained ongoing upkeep and development of that curriculum over time to reflect the needs and abilities of the population that they continue to have at Porterville. Regarding the average length of stay of folks in the secure treatment, if we look at the individuals who are there now and go from their people who've been there a number of years to people who've been admitted this month. So the average length of stay is about 5.5 years, but there is a wide variance in that length of stay. In order to get a better grasp on length of stay in secure treatment, we did look at the disposition of residents who were admitted from 2008 to 2011, because that would allow us to look at individuals who came in under what we call the 1370, which is the incompetent to stand trial commitment, and when they would convert to what we call the Welfare Institution 6500 commitment over that time. Because when you're committed on the 1370, you have 3 years to attain competency. So that gave us a good round number to see who would have gone by the 3 years and if they were still at Porterville. What we found is over those years from 2008 to 2011, 283 people were admitted to secure treatment. 77 of them were placed in less than a year, about 27%. And of those people who were placed in less than a year, 83% went back to court. Of the people who remained there for year 2 and 3 of their 1370, 114 of them went back to placement, about 50% of them to court. And then after 3 years, what would mean once they'd converted to 6500, about 39% went to placement, 10% of those to court. And 53 of those people admitted during that time still reside at Porterville. So it's about 20% are still there. And we're finding that there is about 20 to 25% of the population there that continues to be with us for a lengthy period of time. But that said, if you look at the 283 people who were admitted during that time, and that about 124 went back to court during that time, about 40 to 45% of our individuals become competent at some time during their stay at Porterville. But there are, I will hasten to add, there are a number of factors that influence the attainment and retainment of competency. Porterville keeps records in 6 month increments of people going through the competency program, and they find that about every 6 month period, 5 to 6 people attain competency. If a person can't have their competency restored, then what happens is they generally convert to what we call 6500 commitment. That's the danger to self or others commitment. While they're at Porterville for the 3 years, if it doesn't look like they're going to attain competency, the regional center generally submits a proposed plan to the court. So when the person goes back to court, that proposal of what will happen to them, whether that's a different placement or a direct discharge or whatever, is presented to the court, and then the court decides what happens to them. But if the court essentially determines that the consumer still presents a threat to public health and safety, they're generally returned to Porterville under a 6,500 commitment. Once they're returned to Porterville under a 6,500 commitment, then the IPP process prevails. And in the future, then if the ID team determines that the person should reside in a less restrictive environment, then they continue with the individual program plan process to transition them to a less restrictive environment. So it's the secure treatment area at Porterville is still an intermediate care facility, so people there continue to have treatment plans and programs provided for them, and they move to less restrictive environments on a fairly regular basis. As far as population trends for the secure treatment, we don't have a great amount of study on this. I can give you more anecdotal information from the staff there, but I will say anecdotally, we are finding that it seems that we have more individuals coming in with intellectual disabilities who are more in the borderline to mild range rather than the mild to moderate range. We're also finding that we seem to be having more individuals who are made regional center eligible under what we would call the 5th category. So that's a condition close that resembles intellectual disability or any of the other categories in the definition of developmental disability. We are noticing more serious violent criminal charges of folks who are coming in than in previous years. We are also noticing a slight difference in the age group. The age group in the secure treatment used to be more middle-aged, and now they're either quite a bit younger or quite a bit older. And don't know the reason why for that. We are also finding that we had people who we had made competent, whose competency was questioned when they went back to court, and they were returned to us again. We're finding that's actually reducing now, so that's a positive sign. And we're also seeing repeat offenders actually reducing by a good amount. We used to have a past history of individuals who would become competent, then return to the community, then reoffend, and then come back to Porterville for competency again, and we're seeing that as a reduction. So positive trend, and honestly, I don't have any explanations for you today as why those are happening, but that's our anecdotal information.